Welcome to Standpoint Zero. Today with us we have Mark Jameson from the north of England, who is an artist who has, out of fear of World War III, as he just told me, got into thinking about what's happening in Ukraine, and his speciality is his interest in the far right and the Nazi contingents of this. We're being told, am I right here, Mark? We are constantly being told about neo-Nazis, Nazis, and the argument really that we get from the Kyiv government is that there are no Nazis in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's. I think Putin knew what he was doing when he mentioned denazification as a part of the motivation, because immediately the media had to try and bat that back, and the only way they could do it is by acknowledging some of it, and that obviously gets people like us interested in, is there a bit more to it? Is there, maybe there's a little bit more to it. Maybe
is there a bit more to it? What can you tell me? What can you tell listeners about Nazis, neo-Nazis, or the far right in Ukraine? Is this a myth? Do they exist, and what do we know about them if they exist?
From what I know, not only is it not a myth, but even those people who are raising the alarm, the majority of them are talking about Azov, as if Azov are the only concern. I mean, Azov are irrefutably a Nazi battalion. You had Ross Atkins on the BBC playing it down, telling us that it was all exaggerated about Azov. And only, what was it, 10 or 20% of them were Nazis, and the rest were fine. And he took that. He was given that information from a spokesperson from Azov, who's obviously going to tell you the truth. I'd already watched a Canal Plus documentary that had been broadcast in France, which featured an interview with Andrei Beletsky. In that, I haven't, I was watching this Ross Atkins doing this whitewash. I was recalling this interview with Beletsky where he said at least 60% of us are, hardcore nationalists, but we can always manipulate the figures. I'm not paraphrasing there. He said we can always manipulate the data. Nazis tend not to be the most honest people, but even if we were to take Azov at their word and trust them that they're telling us the absolute truth, it doesn't really account for the likes of Right Sector, ADAR, Dnipro 1, Dnipro 2, UVC, National Corps. National Corps are the kind of street patrolling wing of Azov, if you like. They've got really close ties. Beletsky, I believe, is the leader of National Corps. He was
one of the more interesting facets of this I discovered at the outbreak of this war, when we all started reading about this, was the Kyiv Municipal Council, the city council of Kyiv, employed, officially contracted C-14 and openly, and not neo-Nazi. We are talking people with a pedigree to the prison guards at Auschwitz. Employed them as an auxiliary police force with the brief of quote unquote cleaning up the city. And if that doesn't sound dangerous, God knows what is dangerous.
We've seen what they mean by that since. We've seen what they mean, because they've put it in no uncertain terms that by cleaning up they mean, they've said, themselves on videos, and they've been unashamed about it, that they'll take no prisoners. Anyone they think is a traitor or a saboteur, they will execute them. They've made that absolutely clear. But it's not.
We saw countless videos as well of them harassing and attacking women and children in Roma or Romani camps outside Kyiv. And even in the Ukrainian media at the time, all the way up until 2022, we saw collaboration between the official state police and the C-14 Nazis.
And you should remind people that it's not just your opinion that C-14 are Nazis. It's this isn't anything that you could even begin to refute. C-14, named after the 14 words of David Lane, the famous white supremacist. And Reuters were the ones in 2018. Reuters reported what you've just told us about the municipal police guards. They were given official permission to form municipal police guards in Kiev and Kiev surrounding regions, and numerous other cities. So these are people that are on the streets, and then they've got informal branches of all these big. There's a lot. I mean, even today, I've learned of new groups that I didn't know existed. They all have one thing in common. You can probably guess the ideology. But yeah, Yevhen Karas, he's been included in some quite high-profile talks since 2014. And when he's given a platform to talk, he doesn't mince his words. He's quite straightforward in what his ideology is. Obviously, when he speaks to the BBC or whatever else, he tries to play down the ideology. So there was something else as well about C-14 that's interesting. He claimed, Yevhen Karas, that the Ukrainian security services, we're talking about the SBU, they directly passed on information regarding separatist rallies and whatever else. They passed on directly information to C-14.
This was part. Sorry for interrupting. This was very much part of the collusion, the state and militia collusion that happened in the lead up to the Odessa massacre.
Yeah, and we started off mentioning right sector. The Odessa Massacre, they actually, on their Facebook page and YouTube media accounts, people haven't been. We've got some really good journalists that are still sticking their head out and digging stuff up. But even then, a lot of them haven't dug into some of the actual media coming out of Azov and Right Sector in these groups. Right Sector's Facebook page is interesting. If you get a chance to look at that, just looking at the photographs will tell you a hell of a lot. They declared the Odessa Massacre. I'll quote it directly. They quoted, "The events of May the 2nd, 2014 are another proud moment in our national history." They were really proud of it. And there's a really popular TV show in Ukraine called Shust Alive. And they reported news of the deaths. I've seen the footage of it, so I'm not. This isn't secondhand. I've seen raw footage of the.
And they were applauded by the audience.
And it was quite a sustained applause that these people had been burnt to death, beaten to death, and everything else imaginable. Shot whilst jumping from windows. Again, there's raw, unequivocal footage of this.
And interestingly, that footage shows the police force standing guard whilst people are burning inside and doing nothing.
Oh, we know unequivocally that the police made a decision to do nothing. There's a Ukrainian documentary called Odessa Burnt Alive, made by people in the Donbass. Oh no, it wasn't in Odessa, and they interview a lot of the people involved, some of the survivors, and they show you the information that proves unequivocally the police stood by and did nothing until they were satisfied that the Nazis had their way. But more interestingly, the police ended up arresting quite a lot of the survivors. None of the perpetrators, the survivors, coming out of the building, burnt, beaten, bleeding, and put into police vans. You could argue for their own safety, but they were then taken to the station. And
quite interestingly, at the time, the SBU who were involved in that pickup, on the back of that, ended up on the U.S. State Department's watch list for human rights violations.
And their leader, Dmitry Yarosh, was on Interpol's most wanted list. At some point, I don't know whether it was 2018 or 2019, something like that. At some point, he disappeared from Interpol's most wanted list. But Interpol aren't a Putin agency, and they chose.
Well, of course, yeah.
They chose to put on their.
If we sort of reverse back to well, it's not the immediate background of this, but it's as good a starting point for any discussion on it. If we zoom back to late February 2014 and the Maidan revolution, or the later stage of the Orange Revolution, or the Maidan right-wing coup, if we get to that, that's certainly where I first became aware of right sector. We had 3 days of the what was being called the Euromaidan. Now, as a Scottish activist in 2014, I was interested in other things at the time. My eyes were not on Ukraine, but certainly looking at the Oliver Stone documentary was an eye-opener to me.
Yeah.
Because we saw the Yanukovych government under pressure. It was getting visits from the United States, you know, the famous "fuck the EU" comment from Victoria Nuland. We had all of that going on, but we had the Yanukovych government explicitly tell the police force not to be heavy-handed. So the police were, you know, it was crowd control. Until the third night of the main standoff after the talks, we had the arrival of Right Sector. What happened when Right Sector appeared at Freedom Square in Kyiv?
You'll see, looking at the footage, you notice the red and black OUN flags, blood and soil flags. Anyone who's looked into OUN and the atrocities they were responsible for in World War II, you've got to wonder why these groups worship them so much. But yeah, there were these banners. It became increasingly violent. People, I think, initially. These far-right groups went in with baseball bats and bits of metal and stuff, and then stepped it up. And there were, I don't think there were snipers who shot people dead when things really escalated. I don't think anyone was ever arrested for any of the perpetrators of the shootings. I don't think there was. Well, there was certainly nobody ever prosecuted. That I've seen. And by the way, I've gone back to Odessa. Nobody was ever prosecuted for the people who were burnt alive in Odessa. And Odessa,
of course,
Odessa 2014. What was that? That was May, wasn't it? So it was quite.
That was May. Yeah.
Things were moving pretty quickly. These things, you know, they weren't, you know, having a break to recuperate or anything. They were moving really fast. And not only that, not only was nobody prosecuted after Odessa. Certainly, I don't think any of the snipers involved in Euromaidan were prosecuted. But Zelensky later went on to honor. Well, he honored a number of them as heroes of Ukraine, right sector figures. One of them was what's his name? It's really good. Kotsiubalo, Dmitry Kotsiubalo, and Yarosh was later made the military advisor to the commander-in-chief. There are photographs of him posing with the commander-in-chief with other right sector personnel on their Facebook page, and replete with busts of Bandera and the other figureheads. What's his name? Lebed, Mikhailo Lebed. Big Nazi leaders. Busts, flags, portraits, all there, totally unequivocal. Red and black OUN flag. These people. Yarosh is incredibly. You're reading about him. He's incredibly ambitious. And incredibly, you know, there's a lot of Bandera in him. You'll have heard stories about Bandera. I was just going to ask, would you explain just who Stepan Bandera is? He's a name that we hear all the time. Yeah. Well, he was an OUN leader. He was, a lot of people pro-Ukrainianists like to put the argument forward that he spent a lot of time in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and therefore he wasn't directly responsible for the massacres of hundreds of thousands of Poles and Jews. His army were, and he was the leader of that army, and he was directing them from quite a comfortable prison cell. The only reason why he was locked away by the Nazis was because he'd put forward a motion for Ukrainian independence. He was an outright
which run directly in the face of the Nazis' idea of Lebensraum.
Yeah, this was a falling out of fascists. It wasn't that his ideology. There was any distinction between his ideology and Nazi ideology. This was a falling out of fascists. He wanted Ukraine to have its territory, and he's a national hero. And in fact, in 2010, it was Viktor Yushchenko that had 2010 that he made Bandera a hero of Ukraine officially. And it was around about that time that quite a lot of the statues, of people like Bandera and Kolodinsky went up all around the west of Ukraine, and there are absolutely tons. There's an article that I read. I think it's Forward is the name of the publisher. It goes through. There's an article online anyway that goes through all the different statues. And I was a little bit suspicious of this at first because it was saying, there are literally dozens of Bandera statues, monuments to Roman Shukev. I'm really rubbish at pronouncing these names. Shukevich, street names dedicated to him, plaques in parks and schools. I was a bit skeptical at first, so I checked each one of them out on Wikipedia to make sure it was, they're all there. There are photographs of them. They've been there a while. I just found it interesting how many of them were. I mean, literally dozens of these statues. And I found it interesting when it was that they were put up, and it was Yushchenko that gave the green light to a lot of this. One of the ones in Lviv,
who also incidentally, as one of his last acts in government, was to declare Bandera and a number of other key Nazis in the time of the Second World War, was to declare them heroes of Ukraine.
Yeah, that's
so. I mean, at government level in Ukraine, there has certainly not been a temerity about acknowledging the past, the complicity of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN and the OUNB, in its later stage. There has never been any form of timidity in recognizing this past. But one thing that seems central to the Western narrative right now, or the revised narrative since the Russian invasion, is that a line has been drawn in the sand, that this was the 1940s, and this new nationalism, the right sector, is somehow different. There has been some sort of genealogical break.
Yeah. Which is
how true or untrue is this?
Well, when you look at right sector and you look at the statements they've made, I mean, it was. We're talking really recent history. Andrei Beletsky, when he came out with his talk of a white crusade and the need to, the know him as he's referred to as the white chieftain. Beletsky, he's an interesting figure. I don't think he's quite as powerful as Yarosh, but and Yarosh has made similar comments. I mean, one of these characters that's idolized. With right sector, you'll see this thing in the right sector volunteers are known as UVC, the Ukrainian Volunteer Corps. Yarosh set that up, and one of the insignia that they have are the actual combatants. You've seen the Azov insignia. You understand the black sun and the Waltz angle and you see the SS insignia crop up. Right sector have this kind of trident, and in fact, before right sector, Yarosh had this group called Trident, and it's. I mean, it's interesting to look into it. It's hard to understand the trident on the soldiers patches is 3 rifles, but you see in these photographs of Yarosh with the commander in chief and other right sector personnel, you quite often see on the table in front of them or around them this trilogy of Bandera, Shukevich. I think I'll have to get my head around that name, and Lebed. They're the three sort of big heroes. You see their busts and portraits around, and they seem to be. I was talking to a man on Twitter that had really delved deeply into this, and yeah, the Pravi sector, as they're also known. These 3, you see them on posters, on banners. You know, when you have the marches, the far right marches in Kiev and Lviv, you see these 3 figures repeated. You constantly see these 3 figures. So it's like a sort of almost like a holy trilogy. But yeah, the blood and soil flag, I think there's a football stadium named after. Sorry, just to wander off, but a lot of people. One thing that will rejig some people's memories is when you talk about the Euro 2012 championships held in Ukraine.
Oh, the link between the neo-Nazis and the sort of football firms.
Yeah, the right sector were originally
football hooligans. Yeah,
mainly football hooligans, other assorted Nazis, but there were a confederation of really extremist groups. And I think Yarosh had a little bit of a hard time trying to do the PR stuff. Yeah. Because a lot of these groups were out of control.
But talk to me just a little bit about the continuation of the Nazism of the 1940s and how that managed to survive into the present crisis. And whilst you're talking, I'm just going to very quickly set up a lamp, so I might disappear from your screen, but of course listeners won't see that. But yeah, that's what I'd like to hear about, is the survival of this Nazi ideology and why it's probably incorrect to describe this as neo-Nazism, which we hear an awful lot in the media narrative, which seems, even though it's neo-Nazi and still doesn't sound good, it's still downplaying something very important about this history.
I've had a few people probably correctly picking me up on that and saying there's nothing neo about these Nazis. They're old-fashioned Banderite Nazis. It's always been bubbling near the surface. It's all these Banderites have always been held in high regard. There's really been nothing. There's been no real attempts that I can see to ever address this issue in Ukraine. And when they've instead been encouraged to quote unquote decommunize Ukraine, and that's a term that gets bandied around a lot. This is what fills the vacuum. So I mean, back in after the fall of the Soviet Union, and as America and Europe tried to pull Ukraine further to the west, and started this talk of decommunization. We've seen more of that recently with communist statues being pulled down, people being targeted for saying anything that could be deemed pro-communist, and that nationalism that's always been there has come to the surface, and it can obviously become more and more extreme depending on the scenario. And when you have someone like Viktor Yanukovych giving them the green light, this is what happens. Sorry, Viktor Yanukovych, Viktor Yushchenko, I should have said. So there's never been it's been waiting for a trigger, and the triggers have come in the 2000s with Yushchenko. He found the Nazis useful, and then 2014 they showed the power again. They were getting a lot of help from outside forces, a lot of funding, a lot of PR training. You'll know about the NGOs and so on from Oliver Stone's documentary, Ukraine on Fire. Yeah. So there's been a lot of interference, and really it's just escalated and escalated. I think what a lot of people talk about Zelensky. Zelensky isn't a Nazi. He's a very corrupt person.
He's very much the perfect cover for a Nazi captured state.
And they knew this.
But I've got very bad news. We've run out of time, and quite literally on my side, I'm looking at the banner across the top of my screen, and Moscow is actually calling me right now. But that's a story for another time.
Could you ask them where my rubles are? Because I haven't been paid a single penny since.
Yeah, I'm always getting into trouble for being on the Kremlin's payroll, and yeah, they don't pay very well. The sanctions are working because we're poor as church mice.
I haven't had a crumb.
But Mark, I know I've had to cut us short here because there's other things happening. Hopefully, I can have you back on the show in the very near future. Yep. Would that be possible?
Yeah. Hopefully, know a little bit more about some of the other aspects. I mean, Kolomoisky's a really big subject to talk about. So talking about Kolomoisky and his funding of a lot of these battalions would be worth doing, I think. Okay, well,
right. Well, Mark, thank you very much for being on the show, and hopefully I will talk to you again very soon. And thanks for your time, Mark. Thank you.
You too. Cheers. See you later.